Snow moved low across the canyon floor, carried by a hard wind that cut through everything it touched. Cole Ward pressed one hand to his ribs and leaned into the stone wall, his legs barely keeping him upright. For 3 days, he had been riding without steady food, sleeping under rock shelves when he could find them. His horse was lost to the cold, and his revolver was the only weight left that kept him feeling anchored. His body ached from an old wound that had never healed right, a saber cut from the war that still burned deep in his side when he pushed himself too far. He had no destination except away from the town where men had reminded him of debts he couldn't pay, and where the faces of the dead still visited him when he closed his eyes. He thought this canyon might offer a place to lie down and let the winter finish him. He was too tired to plan anything else. That was when the door opened. It wasn't a cabin in the way he knew them, just a dugout cut into the canyon wall, low and hidden. The doorway braced with raw planks. A figure stepped into the wind, small, thin from hunger, but upright and firm. The blanket she wore clung to her shoulders, whipping around her legs. Her black hair was unbound, her dark eyes sharp, even in the blur of snow. She studied him the way someone studies an animal that may not live another hour. Her first thought was clear on her face. He won't last in this cold. Her second thought was quieter, but heavier. Bringing him inside may end me as well. Still, she spoke, her voice cutting through the wind's howl. Cowboy, we are shivering. Get in my shelter, now. Nadita had lived in this dugout for nearly 4 months, hiding from her own people. They had cast her out when she argued against bloodshed, when she tried to keep peace with traitors along the frontier. To them, she was dangerous, a woman who weakened tradition. Alone, she had survived by gathering brush, hunting small game, and caching beans stolen from a trader's cart. She told herself she didn't need anyone. But when she saw him stumble, his knees nearly giving way, his face drawn and pale, she acted before thinking. She hooked her arm under his and pulled. His weight startled her, solid and heavy, all bone and muscle under a worn coat. But he moved with her, dragging his boots across the ground. Inside, the door was shut against the wind, and darkness folded in, broken only by the glow of a small fire. Cole leaned against the wall, every breath sharp, and looked around. The space was cramped. Rough shelves were hacked into the stone. A low fire pit was dug into the dirt, and smoke vented through a crack in the roof. There was a line with clothes drying, a crate for food, and a pot steaming with beans. The air was thick with smoke, and the faint, sour smell of damp leather. He turned his eyes back to the woman. She was younger than he expected, maybe 24 or 25, but her face carried lines that only hard days could cut. Her cheekbones were sharp, her lips chapped from the cold, and her dress was torn at the seams. The shoulder cloth had given way, exposing more of her skin than she meant to, and the neckline hung loose, slipping when she bent near the fire. The skirt had ripped along the thigh, showing strong legs that had carried her across rough ground. None of it was done for beauty, yet beauty was there, unavoidable, rough, and real. Nadita crouched by the fire and dipped a rag into hot water, wringing it out before pressing it against his eyebrow. Cole winced at the sting but didn't pull away. His eyes stayed fixed on her fingers, steady, careful, unafraid. He thought of how long it had been since anyone had touched him without anger. Since before the war, maybe. "You're bleeding," she said quietly. Her English was careful, the words shaped with effort but firm. "It'll stop," he muttered, his voice rough. He wanted to explain why he was there, what had happened, but the words stuck. He wasn't sure he even knew himself anymore. She handed him a bowl. "Eat, then talk." The beans were plain, but when he tasted them, his chest tightened with relief. He ate slowly, not because he wasn't hungry, but because he was ashamed of how hungry he was. Across from him, Nadita took her own bowl, watching him between bites. A question lingered in her gaze. Had A white man inside her shelter could bring patrols, questions, punishment if she was found. But she also saw his exhaustion, the way his hand trembled slightly as he lifted the spoon, the scar along his jaw, the weight in his eyes. This man had been broken before she found him, and some part of her couldn't leave him to die on the canyon floor. Cole felt the heat of the fire on his face and the weight of her stare. He knew she was measuring him, wondering if he was worth the risk. He wondered the same about her. Could she be trusted? Or would she hand him over the first time it meant saving herself? He looked at the dugout, at the fire, at the woman across from him. And for the first time in months, he felt the smallest pull of something he hadn't let himself think about. Maybe there was a reason to keep moving. Maybe there was a reason to stay alive. The silence between them wasn't easy, but it wasn't empty either. It was the beginning of something neither of them yet understood. The morning light pressed through the thin seam above the dugout door, pale and sharp. Cole opened his eyes to the sound of the fire being stoked. His back ached from the hard floor, his ribs sore from too many nights without proper rest. But the heat in the room and the smell of coffee steadied him. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he saw her kneeling by the fire, her hair loose down her back, blankets slipping from her shoulders as she poured boiling water into a tin cup. He watched her in silence, studying details he had missed the night before. The dugout wasn't just a hole in the canyon wall. It had been lived in, worked into something more. The shelves were cut smooth enough to hold jars. The floor was swept of dirt near the sleeping shelf. The fire ring was built with care, so smoke drifted up through the vent instead of choking the room. This was survival, shaped by patience, not luck. Cole shifted, and a wince escaped him as a pole of pain shot through his ribs. She turned her head at the sound, her eyes steady on him, and handed him the cup. Coffee, strong. He nodded, wrapping his hands around the tin. The heat bit his palms, but he welcomed it. "You've been here long," he said, his voice rasped with sleep. "Since the first snow." She kept her eyes on the fire as she answered, "For moons. I do not count days." He thought on that. 4 months alone, hunted by her own people, with nothing but a dugout and whatever she could steal or trade for. The idea of it carried weight. He wanted to ask why she had been cast out, but something about the sharpness of her shoulders stopped him. He knew what exile felt like. He carried his own in every mile he walked. Nadita broke the silence instead. "Why are you here, cowboy? This canyon is not close to your towns." Cole stared at the coffee, then at his boots lined against the wall. "I left town with nothing worth taking. No work, no horse. I just kept walking." He paused, realizing how little sense that made spoken out loud. "I fought in the war. When it ended, there wasn't a place left for me. Been drifting since." She studied him, lips pressed tight. He had answered, but not enough. His body told more than his words. The scar along his ribs, the limp in his leg, the lines around his eyes carved deeper than his age. He wasn't just wandering, he was running from something. Cole shifted the cup in his hands, uneasy under her gaze. "You live out here alone. What do you keep safe?" Nadita's expression hardened. "I keep low. I watch the rim. I know where to hide. My people." She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "They do not forgive me. If they see me, they will finish what they started." He wanted to ask what that meant exactly, but her voice carried enough steel that he didn't push. Instead, he nodded. "You built this place with your own hands." "Not all. My father knew of it. Traders dug here once. When they left, I took it." She sat back on her heels and wrapped the blanket tight. "It is not a home, only a place to not die." The words sat heavy in the room. Cole felt them more than he wanted to. He thought about the farm he had once owned in Missouri, burned out before the war even ended. His wife, buried in ground he never saw again. He knew what it was to live in a place, only to not die. The silence stretched, but it was not the sharp kind anymore. It was the kind where both people waited for the other to move. Nadita rose and pulled a small sack from the shelf. Beans for later. We will need water. She looked at him then, weighing him. You can walk? He grunted and pushed himself to his feet, steadying himself on the wall. His body hurt, but he forced it to move. I can walk. At the door, she paused, her hand on the bar. One thing, she said. If riders come, if my people come, you do not speak. You do not show yourself. Understand? Cole met her eyes, dark and steady in the thin light. I understand. When she opened the door, the cold air hit them hard, the snow bright against the canyon floor. Cole squinted against the glare, following her as she moved sure-footed down the trail to the creek. She carried a clay jug, her blanket now tied around her waist. He noticed how careful she was with every step, scanning the rim, listening. She was smaller than him, but there was nothing fragile in the way she moved. At the creek, she crouched and broke the thin crust of ice with a stone, filling the jug while he kept watch. His hand brushed her elbow when she nearly slipped, steadying her without thinking. She didn't pull away. For a brief moment, her eyes lifted to his, softer than before. By the time they climbed back to the dugout, the air between them had shifted. It was still cautious, still heavy with questions, but it carried a thread of something else, a fragile decision made on both sides. He would not leave yet. She would not push him out. That night, when she set 2 bowls of beans on the floor and pushed the larger one toward him before taking her own, he noticed. And when he slid half of it back to her without a word, she noticed too. The next morning came with a hard frost. Cole woke to the scrape of metal on wood and saw Nadita stirring beans with the tip of a knife. Her blanket had slipped, and the torn dress she wore was patched poorly at the seam with twine. He sat up slowly, ribs aching, and faced the questions that had been turning in his head. How had this solitary woman survived months in a canyon that could kill a man in a single night? And why had her own people cast her out so harshly? He cleared his throat. You said they would finish what they started if they found you. What did they start? Nadita's eyes stayed on the beans. When she finally answered, her voice was flat, controlled. They call me traitor. Said I care more for traitors than for blood. I spoke against a raid. I gave food to a man who was starving. A white man. That was enough. They tied me to a post for a day. When they cut me free, they told me to walk and never come back. Cole studied her face. There was no trace of self-pity, only a calm hardness. She had repeated this story to herself enough times that it had become fact, not a wound. Still, the way her jaw tightened told him the memory burned even now. He didn't press. Instead, he asked the other question. How do you keep food for months here? It's more than what you have on that shelf. Her mouth tugged into something almost like a smirk. You think I live only on beans? I trap rabbits, sometimes a goat. If one strays, traders pass close when snow is less. I take what I need. Her eyes flicked to him. And I'm not afraid to steal. Cole nodded once. He respected that answer. Survival didn't leave room for pride. After they ate, she handed him an axe with a short handle, the head dull, but workable. Wood. We need more. He followed her outside. The canyon stretched wide. The snow piled against the rock walls. He set the axe into a block of juniper, his shoulders burning with the effort. Each strike sent pain through his ribs, but he kept at it, teeth clenched. She watched from a few steps away, her jug balanced on her hip as she scanned the sky, the rim, every shadow. He noticed she never let herself relax fully, not even for a breath. At one point, she stepped close to show him how she stacked brush against the wall to keep snow from pressing through the cracks. Her hand brushed his as they worked, and she didn't pull back. He caught the scent of her hair smoke and earth and felt a strange weight lift in his chest. By midday, they carried water again. The ice was thicker, and when Nadita leaned to break it, she slipped on the slick stone. Cole caught her at the waist before she fell. For a moment, she stayed there, her body pressed to his, her breath quick from the scare. Her eyes rose to his, guarded but softer than before. Something had shifted. Neither of them said it, but both knew it. When they returned to the dugout, she set 2 bowls on the ground. As before, she pushed the larger one toward him, but this time, when he slid part of it back, she smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth in the firelight. The silence that followed wasn't suspicion anymore. It was the beginning of trust, rough and unspoken. Cole understood then that neither of them would ask the other to leave. Not yet. And for the first time in maybe years, he felt the pull of belonging. The 4th morning brought a sharper wind. Cole rose stiffly and noticed the dugout felt colder. Fresh snow had pressed into the clay roof seam, forming a thin crack where the air slipped through. An unspoken question settled in his mind. How could this small shelter truly stand against a winter like this? And what dangers truly pressed at the edges of this canyon? He decided to ask her as he worked. How long can this place hold if the snow keeps pushing? Nadita looked up at the roof seam, then back at him. Long enough. I mended every storm. Traders dug it strong. They left. I stayed. Alone is harder, but no one tells you to leave. He studied her as she spoke. Alone meant safety from her people, but it also meant exposure. And what about them? He asked. The ones you said would finish what they started. Do they come this way? Her jaw tensed. After a long moment, she said quietly, sometimes. Scouts. They check for food, for signs. I watched the rim. That was when Cole stepped outside to bring in more wood. As he lifted his head, he froze. Across the rim, far above the dugout, 3 silhouettes moved against the pale sky. Riders, too far to make out faces, but close enough that he knew. He carried the wood inside without speaking. Nadita saw his face and knew before he said a word. She closed the door, set the bar, and went to the sleeping shelf where a flat stone covered a hollow. From it, she drew a small bow, a handful of arrows, and a carved charm. She pressed the charm to her lips, then set it back. Cole watched, uneasy. The dugout wasn't just a shelter, it was a trap. He thought of leaving, of sparing her the danger, but the idea felt wrong now. He had eaten her food, taken her shelter. Walking away would mean leaving her to face those riders alone. They saw nothing, she said finally, though her voice was thin. The snow hides tracks. Cole sat by the fire, his jaw tight. He pulled his revolver from under his coat, checked the cylinder, then wrapped it in cloth and tucked it away. If they come, I'll keep out of sight. But if they push through that door, she stopped him with a look. If they come, we hide you. They will not spare me if you are found. Her words sat heavy between them. Hiding him was a risk she had already taken. As dusk fell, they worked in tense silence. She kept glancing at the door, listening. Inside, the fire painted her face in warm light, her collarbone catching its glow where the torn dress slipped. As she worked, she noticed him watching once and met his eyes, holding them longer than before. When they settled in for the night, Nadita lay with her back to him, her body tense. Cole listened to the wind and thought of the riders on the rim. He wondered if they would return, and if she had been hiding here all this time only to be discovered because of him. He also wondered if that mattered anymore. For the first time in years, he didn't want to keep walking. He wanted to stay. Snow came again that night. Cole lay awake, listening to the wind drag across the canyon. He could hear Nadita breathing just a few feet away, steady but not deep enough for real sleep. He realized she never slept fully, always half alert. How had she lasted 4 months like this without losing her mind to fear? The answer was likely as plain as survival itself. Work, watch, endure. By morning, the dugout was half buried. The door was hard to push open. Cole shouldered it until the drift gave way, a wave of white spilling inside. He grunted at the effort, pain flaring in his ribs. Nadita hurried to help, pushing with both hands. Together, they cleared a path. The air outside cut sharper than any blade. They worked in silence for the first hour, him chopping wood, her hauling snow. At one point, she stopped and stared at him. "Why you stay?" she asked suddenly. "You saw the riders. You know the risk." He leaned on the axe handle, catching his breath. "'Cause I've been running too long. No camp, no home, just what's behind me. If I leave now, I'm back to nothing." Her gaze on him was steady and searching. "And if they find you here? If they kill me for hiding you, I'll answer for myself," he said. "Not you." She didn't argue. She only turned back to the snow, her jaw tight. Later, by the fire, she mended her dress with a needle from a small leather pouch. Cole noticed her hands, calloused and strong, but trembling slightly. He realized how little she had left a dress, a blanket, this dugout, and still she had taken him in. He shifted closer to the fire. "What do you do when you're alone here? When there's no snow to clear, no wood to cut?" She looked at him as if surprised by the question. "I keep watch. I think. Sometimes I sing, quiet, so no one hears." Her lips pressed together. "Sometimes I talk to myself." Cole nodded slowly. He understood that loneliness could gnaw at a person worse than hunger. The hours passed with small tasks. She showed him where she had laid traps along the creek bed. He reset one with her, his hand brushing hers as they worked the wire. She didn't pull away. The silence between them had shifted again. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but of people who didn't need to explain every motion. That night, Nadita sat closer than before. The dugout felt smaller, the air thicker with heat. She leaned against him briefly, her shoulder touching his arm. Cole felt the weight of it, simple but grounding. His chest tightened, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar feeling of someone choosing to rest against him. She spoke soft, almost a whisper. "If they come back, we must be ready." He turned his head toward her, catching the firelight on her face. "We will be." For a long time, neither moved. Cole thought of the emptiness he had carried for years, and how strange it was to feel it lifting now, inside this narrow dugout carved from stone. Nadita thought of the risk she had taken, and how she no longer wished she had left him in the snow. She reached for his hand under the blanket, leaving it there without a word. He closed his fingers around hers, and for the first time since they met, both of them let themselves breathe without fear. The storm passed by morning, leaving the canyon floor buried in white. The dugout door groaned as Cole shoved it open. He climbed out, boots sinking deep, and dragged a narrow path with the axe handle. Nadita followed, jug in hand. For the first time, he saw her laugh faintly when she nearly fell, waist deep in the snow. She pulled herself out, shaking her head at him as if daring him to comment. A question hung in the cold air, unspoken but sharp. Could two souls, so different, forged in separate fires, truly share anything beyond the raw instinct to survive? Cole didn't have the answer yet, but something inside him was already forming one. At the creek, the ice was thicker. Cole used the butt of the axe to break it while Nadita crouched close. When she handed the jug up, her fingers brushed his, cold and trembling. For a moment, she let her hand linger against his glove before pulling it back. Neither said a word. They returned to the dugout, clothes stiff from frost. Nadita stripped the wet blanket from her shoulders, hanging it by the fire. Cole sat on the ground, rubbing his hands together. He noticed her shivering and passed his coat toward her. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "You'll freeze. I've frozen before," he said. "Don't make me watch it happen again." She took it finally, slipping it over her torn dress. The coat swallowed her, but the way she pulled it tight said more than thanks. She settled near the fire, her lips pressing together, as if holding back something she hadn't said in a long time. Cole leaned back, studying her. The questions pressed at him again. Why hadn't she left this canyon? Why stay in this place that was both shelter and prison? He asked it plain. You could have gone anywhere. Why stay here? Nidita's eyes lifted, dark and steady. Where would I go? To the people who call me traitor? To the towns that spit at me because of my blood? Here. No one tells me I don't belong. The truth of it sat heavy between them. Cole understood. He too had nowhere left to belong. No one waiting. No one calling him home. For both of them, this canyon wasn't a choice. It was the last place the world hadn't taken. As night fell, the fire burned low. Nidita sat so close her knee brushed his. The coat hung loose at her chest, the firelight catching the line of her collarbone. Cole tried not to stare, but the air between them was different now, charged in a way that made the silence louder. She shifted, her braids slipping across her shoulder, and her eyes found his. For a long moment, they only looked at one another. The weight of weeks of loneliness pressing into the space they shared. Then, she leaned in slow and steady and pressed her lips to his. It was light at first, uncertain, but he answered, his hand rising to her jaw. The kiss deepened, careful but sure, the heat mixing with the sound of their breaths. Her hand slid to his chest, her fingers pressing against the scar beneath his shirt, as if testing whether he was real. He drew her closer, his thumb brushing the side of her neck. For the first time since he had stumbled into this canyon, he felt the ache of survival give way to something else, something that made sense. When they pulled apart, they stayed close, foreheads nearly touching. She whispered, "You can go when the thaw comes." "I could," he answered, his voice low and steady, "but I won't." She searched his face, weighing the truth of it, then let out a slow breath. Instead of pulling away, she stayed beside him, her head resting against his shoulder. The fire crackled. The wind moved across the canyon, and for the first time, the dugout felt less like a place to hide and more like a place to live. The next day began with an uneasy stillness that made Cole's skin prickle. He rose before Nidita, stepping outside to check the path. His boots broke through the icy surface, each crunch too loud. He scanned the rim, and that was when he saw them. Fresh tracks pressed into the snow. Not theirs. Horses. At least 3. When he came back inside, Nidita was sitting by the fire. She saw his face and knew. "Riders?" she asked. He nodded. Past the rim. In the night. Might come back. Her eyes dropped to the fire. Then she stood, pulling the blanket tighter. "Then we prepare." The unspoken question was obvious. How could they possibly defend a dugout carved from stone, with one door and no way out, especially if her people learned she was sheltering a white man? Nidita gave the answer in the way she moved. She knelt by the sleeping shelf and pulled the flat stone aside, retrieving her bow and arrows. She handed Cole a small knife, its edge dull but still dangerous. "If they come inside, you fight only if there is no other way. If they find you, they will kill us both." Cole studied her. "And what if they already suspect? What if they come to be sure?" "Then I lie," she said simply. "I tell them I am alone. I tell them you were never here." Her jaw tightened. "And you stay hidden no matter what you hear," he wanted to argue. But he knew she was right. Survival wasn't about pride. He slid the knife into his boot and set his revolver back under the blanket, wrapped tight. By midday, the sound of hooves reached them. Cole's chest clenched. He held her, his chin resting against her hair, her body tense as if waiting for the knock. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. "They will come again. They never forget." Cole's grip tightened. "Then we'll be ready next time, both of us." She looked at him then, long and searching. And for the first time, she didn't try to push away the truth. They were no longer two strangers caught in the same storm. They were bound now, by choice, by danger, by the silent promise that neither would face it alone. The air inside the dugout stayed heavy long after the riders were gone. Cole sat by the fire while Nadita moved restlessly from shelf to door. Both of them knew a single barred door was not enough. They knew, despite the danger, Cole would not leave. Nadita finally stopped pacing and crouched near him. We cannot wait for them to come again. If they search next time, they will find you. Cole looked into the fire, his jaw tight. He thought of the years he had spent drifting. He had nowhere else to go. Then we make this place stronger, he said. The plan began with the back wall. Nadita showed him a shallow seam of stone where the earth softened. Together, they worked with the dull knife, a salvaged chisel head, and their bare hands. The hours dragged, but soon a narrow tunnel began to take shape, an escape route leading upward to a ledge shielded by brush. Cole braced it with willow poles, while Nadita packed clay against the sides. The work left their hands raw, but when they finally crawled through to test it, both felt a weight lift. They would not be trapped. Afterward, Cole cut more wood, stacking it high against the wall outside as a false barrier. Nadita gathered stones from the creek, arranging them in piles near the door. She explained in a quiet, steady voice, "My father taught me before they cast me out. He was a scout. He said a home must never have only one way out. I thought I would never use those lessons, but I kept them." As night fell, they sat by the fire, their backs against the wall, relief sharper than their exhaustion. Nadita was wrapped in Cole's coat again, the torn dress beneath slipping open at the neckline. She didn't try to hide it. The quiet between them was no longer just about survival. She turned her head toward him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "You could still leave," she said, her voice carrying a tired honesty. "Take the tunnel, walk the canyon, vanish before they return. No one would blame you." Cole let out a slow breath. His ribs ached, his hands throbbed, but none of it weighed more than the thought of walking away. "I've had enough of leaving," he said. "I've left towns, work, graves behind me." "Not this time." She studied him, searching for hesitation, but found none. Slowly, she leaned closer until her head rested against his shoulder. His arm went around her without thought, and she stayed there, her breathing evening out for the first time since the knock at the door. The fire burned low. Cole felt her weight against him, warm and steady, and knew the dugout was no longer just a shelter. It was theirs. For the first time since he had staggered through the snow, the thought of tomorrow did not feel like something to dread. It felt like something worth defending. The thaw came slow, dripping from the rim in thin streams that cut into the snow. Cole and Nadita worked each morning, sharing tasks as if they had lived together for years, but both knew what was coming. When would the riders return? When would suspicion sharpen into proof? The answers came sooner than either of them wanted. The sound of hooves carried into the canyon at midday, not distant, but close. Too close. Cole stepped to a crack in the door and counted 5 riders, not 3. Their voices were sharp, the tone not of men passing, but of men searching. Nadita's face tightened, but she didn't falter. She pulled the bar from the door and turned to him. "Stay behind the shelf. If they find you, there is no denying it." Cole's jaw clenched. "I'm not hiding while you stand alone." Her eyes burned into his. "If you show yourself, we both die. If you let me speak, maybe we live." The truth of it was solid. He slid back into the crawl space, knife in his boot, revolver close, every muscle strung tight. He watched through a narrow gap as Nadita opened the door. The men dismounted, their voices harsh. They demanded to see inside, accusing her of hiding someone. One pointed at the stacked woodpile. saying it looked too fresh. Nadita met their eyes one by one, her voice steady. "This is my shelter. I build it. I keep no one here. You can look, but you will find nothing." They pushed past her, their boots heavy on the dirt floor. Cole's heart hammered. One of them stopped near the sleeping shelf, the curtain just inches from his face. He reached out, tugging at the edge, then another called him away, saying there was nothing here but scraps of beans and smoke. For a moment, it seemed they would leave, but the youngest lingered, his eyes fixed on Nadita. He asked why she had survived when others cast her out. His voice carried suspicion and something darker, a threat dressed as curiosity. Nadita's jaw set. She lifted her chin. "Because I'm stronger than you think." The man sneered, but the elder barked at him, and they turned back to their horses. The sound of hoofs faded until the canyon grew quiet again. Cole slid from the crawl space, sweat cold on his back. He found Nadita leaning against the door, her shoulders shaking once before she steadied herself. He crossed to her, laying a hand on her arm. She looked up at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "They will not stop," she said. "Not until they believe I am nothing." Cole shook his head. "You're not nothing, and you're not alone." The words hung in the dugout, heavier than any silence before. She reached for him, her hands clutching his shirt, and he held her tight, his chin against her hair. For a long while, neither spoke. When they finally pulled apart, the fire had burned low. Cole sat with her beside him. "We can't just wait for them to come again. We make this ours. A home, not a hiding place." Nadita studied him, her eyes searching for weakness. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Then we stay, together." That evening, they cooked beans and rabbit, eating side by side. Cole marked a plan in the dirt. Where to plant when the thaw opened the creek bed. Where to cut a second shelf into the wall. Where to set a cradle board if the time came. Nadita watched him, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "You speak like a man who belongs here." "I do," he answered without hesitation. With you, night fell, and for the first time, they did not sleep apart. She lay against him, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. The storm outside had broken. The canyon was breathing quiet. By dawn, the world looked different. The riders might come again. Danger might still circle the rim. But inside the dugout, the choice had been made. Cole was no longer a wanderer. Nadita was no longer alone. Their shelter was not just stone and fire anymore. It was a home, a life built out of exile and survival, held together by the decision to stay. And that was the end of it. Clear, certain, finished. 2 lives bound together in the canyon. Not by chance, but by a choice neither of them would ever turn from again.